Fair? I'll tell you what's not fair. Spending a lifetime on a dime store shelf watching every other toy be sold.
Shelfwarmers are the toys that no one wants. The ones that clog up shelves for months or even years after their release. But the reasons why aren't always clear. So join me as we examine the factors that resign a toy to this dreary fate in this episode of Shelfwarmer Shame. Our first subject today, Avatar: The Way of Water, specifically the 7-inch action figure line for the film, produced by McFarlane Toys. Now, for those who may have forgotten, and truthfully who could blame you, Avatar 2 is currently the 3rd highest grossing movie of all time, beaten only by Avengers Endgame and its own predecessor. With this enormous success, one would think that the film's tie-in merchandise would simply fly off shelves. Instead, the exact opposite is true, with some stores literally giving these figures away in buy one get one free sales. But if you weren't able to catch any of those, don't fret, even 3 years later it's still easy to find them marked down by 75%. Before we fully examine the reasons for this line's failure, I must admit that I don't know anything about Avatar. I watched 40 minutes of the second one at a friend's house and that's it. I don't know or care about this franchise beyond that. With that being said, the sculpt and paint on these figures is excellent. The Na'vi are appropriately slender, and the printing on the faces is executed perfectly. The intricate tattoos on Tonawari are especially well done, and each of the figures features some element of blacklight paint. We even have some light nipple detailing.
Boobies!
Colonel Miles Quaritch is similarly good looking, with some pleasing camo on the pants and a face that looks exactly like Stephen Lang. Now, a lot of people take issue with the articulation on McFarlane figures, but from what I've seen, these issues are more about inconsistency rather than quality. Because when they do remember to put everything in, the articulation is incredible. With butterfly shoulders, double knees and elbows supplemented by swivels, and even toe bend, pretty much anything is possible. Even Quaritch is crazy posable despite his small size, and it's all made so much easier with the included stands, which is a practice I really appreciate from McFarlane, and I wish more companies would do it as well. Sadly, the accessories are nowhere near as dynamic. For the most part, the Na'vi include fairly naturalistic weapons such as knives, spears, and axes. With the excellent articulation, it should be a cinch to get some dynamic poses with them, but some of the accessories are brought down hard by some weird design choices. Neytiri's bow has its arrows and a bunch of other crap permanently stuck to it, making it impossible to actually use in any archery pose, and Jake's knife is way too puny for him to actually hold. Conversely, the Colonel's accessories are pretty amazing. To make up for his diminutive proportions, he comes packed to the brim with weapons, tactical gear, blast effects, alternate hands, and caffeine retrieval equipment. And all of them are completely free from any extraneous garbage to prevent him from using them properly. So it looks like humanity wins again. Still, if you found yourself frustrated by the included accessories, McFarlane also provides a variety of beasts and vehicles to bulk things up. For the Na'vi, you have 2 Banshees and a Skimwing, and for the Colonel, the Amp and Crab suits. Despite my overall lack of interest in this franchise, I found myself pleasantly surprised by these figures. Colonel Quaritch especially impressed me, with so much dynamism packed into a tiny package. So what was it that made this line so repellent to everyone else? Well, as mentioned, I think the accessories are the most evident issue. While Quaritch is chock full of neat stuff to fiddle with, the Na'vi's weapons are either fairly bland or completely useless. Things can of course be spiced up by buying some of the additional items, but they were pretty expensive upon their initial release, though it's now easy to find them super cheap. All except for the Amp suit, god damn it, that's the one I wanted the most! You already put literally everything else on clearance, what's so special about this? Speaking of clearance, I did notice that whenever I see these figures marked down, Wave 2 seems to be the most prominent, and I think that may also be something to consider. Wave 1, based on the first movie, consists of Jake, Sully, Neytiri and Quaritch, along with 2 creatures and a vehicle. Meanwhile, Wave 2 has pretty much the same layout, but with Tonawari replacing the Colonel. It even has exactly the same amp suit, just with a different weapon. I think this decision to do an almost identical lineup for the second wave was another reason for the line's failure. Because while these looks are technically different, being based on the second movie, I don't think they're distinct enough to push someone to buy another figure. I didn't even realize that these were different until I started researching for this video. Another of this line's issues is the scale. When these figures were first announced, they were listed as 7-inch scale, and there was quite a bit of confusion as to what exactly that meant. Usually this would imply that a regular human would be 7 inches tall and everything else would scale around them. But what it apparently means in this case is that the Na'vi are 7 inches tall and the humans are much smaller at around 4.5 inches. There's nothing necessarily wrong with a line that scales only with itself, but when they can mix and match with others, it opens up a lot more options.
Welcome to Fortnite.
As it stands, the Avatar line is way too small to interact with other 7-inch lines, and slightly too big to interact with 3 3/4-inch lines. If they were just slightly smaller, they could slot in nicely with classic scale Star Wars. On saying all that, it's probably this scale that allows the figures to be as impressively dynamic as they are. If they were any smaller, Quaritch probably wouldn't be able to move anywhere near as well, and if they were any bigger, each of the Na'vi would likely cost upwards of $80, and the rideable animals would be too expensive to produce. Ultimately, McFarlane may have made the right choice considering the circumstances. Even so, I think this may have been at least a contributing factor to the line's failure. The final problem is one that extends beyond the toy line itself. It's hardly an original thought, but at least relative to its gargantuan box office intake, Avatar's cultural relevance seems to be very low. Don't get me wrong, James Cameron is clearly a very talented filmmaker. Anyone who can get general audiences to sit still for 3 hours has to be doing something right. But the experience clearly wasn't resonant enough to make anyone want to buy toys from it. In my own experience, when the second movie came out, I remember seeing this meme for a few days and then absolutely nothing about it after that. There seemed to be way more buzz around Puss in Boots than there ever was about Avatar, and I think the failure of this overall excellent toy line is an unfortunate consequence of this phenomenon. In short, it seems that this line was brought down by 4 factors: accessories, scale, character lineup, and the overall forgettability of its source material. It's severely disappointing because I really do love these figures. They're so good they almost make me want to watch the movie. Moving over to a different part of the Disney conglomerate, here we have our second subject, the Star Wars The Black Series Hyperreal Luke Skywalker, inspired by The Empire Strikes Back. Initially retailing for $180, I picked up my copy for a whopping $17. That's less than dimes on the dollar. What the hell is going on here? I guess we should start by asking what exactly defines something as hyper-real. The main distinguishing feature is that, in contrast to the sculpted joints of regular action figures, the Hyperreal line uses metal armatures overlaid with rubber clothing. This, aided by the overall smoothness of the joints, makes for a much more seamless posing experience, since there are no awkward cuts in the knees or anything like that. It also makes it really good for stop motion, but that's kind of besides the point. Beyond the body itself, we also have some very detailed head sculpts with photoreal face printing, and a nice wash and dry brush to the hair. To further immerse you in the experience, the package also includes an enormous variety of interchangeable hands, a holsterable blaster, a Bespin-inspired base, and of course a lightsaber with a removable blade. It's not entirely without issues though, as the hands can be very difficult to swap out and the rubber suit is a magnet for dust. Despite these relatively small problems, the figure overall is incredible. With excellent detailing, tons of options, and the amazing articulation courtesy of the armature system, this is among the most fun I've ever had with a Star Wars toy. So why then did I find it rotting on shelves for 10% of its original price? Well, I think the shelf warming of Hyperreal Luke has less to do with the product itself and more the context surrounding the product. The first factor is the scale. The Hyperreal range was released as a subdivision of the Star Wars Black Series line, which focuses on figures that stand around 6 inches tall. But this new skeletal articulation scheme necessitates a much bigger size, meaning the Hyperreal toys have to scale at around 8 inches. This put them completely out of whack with people's pre-established collections, leaving them to be forgotten like all the other times the Black Series tried to do different scales. But that kind of begs the question as to why the mainline Black Series never fell victim to this same phenomenon. After all, for almost 40 years, Star Wars action figures had always been 3 3/4 inches tall, so how did the sudden arrival of 6-inch figures manage to survive? Well, for one, at around the same time that the Black Series was getting started, import companies such as Bandai and Medicom were producing Star Wars toys at the same scale, creating more options to fill out your collection in a timely manner. Furthermore, the 6-inch scale overall had already proven popular with Marvel Legends, showing that it would probably work for a franchise of similar size. Conversely, the Hyperreal line is basically alone at 8 inches. The only things remotely similar are maybe some NECA retro cloth toys and the original Black Series Yoda that was slightly too big. Besides that, your only option is other Star Wars Hyperreal toys. Which brings us to another problem, pricing and distribution. While Luke may have sold poorly, the opposite was true for his wavemate Darth Vader. Unless there are some very unique circumstances, Vader's iconography usually ensures that he'll sell no matter what. Even so, these two are very clearly intended to be a companion piece, so what stopped people from picking up Luke to go along with his father? Well, the most obvious culprit is the price. At $180 compared to the $45 of a standard 6-inch figure, the cost of entry is pretty high, even with all the included extras. However, if someone picked up Vader and was impressed enough, I think they could easily be convinced to buy Luke as well. That's where the distribution problems come in. From the very first day of release, every store I went to only ever had Luke. I've literally only seen Hyperreal Vader in person once, and it was at a second-hand shop 4 years after the original release. A lot of the incentive to buy Luke was reliant on buying Vader first, but with the latter's shoddy distribution, most people weren't able to get started in the first place. But why is that exactly? I mean, Vader's design is obviously visually cooler, but Luke is the main character of the original trilogy, so why were people so hesitant to purchase him? Well, it may be controversial to say, but maybe the Bespin outfit wasn't the best choice. I mean, it certainly comes from a very iconic scene, but I don't think the outfit itself is part of the reason why. From a purely fashion perspective, it's pretty bland and uninteresting, and I think when the average person pictures Luke Skywalker, their mind most likely jumps to the farm boy or Jedi Knight outfits. The final issue dooming this line is a more conceptual one. Alongside the armature articulation, the Hyperreal concept includes extremely realistic face paints produced via photoreal face printing tech. This would be very impressive if not for one small problem. Every Hasbro figure uses photoreal face printing. Bitch, you ain't special. Having an action figure with super realistic face paint isn't impressive anymore, it's standard. That's the overall problem with this line. If it had come out several years earlier, it may have done well, but in 2020 it simply had too much pre-established competition that managed to do what it does but better. Why spend $180 on this figure with Hyperreal face printing when you can get a $40 toy that does the same thing? And the $40 toy also has 7 years worth of stuff to scale with. And a lot of these $40 toys came out before COVID fucked up Hasbro's distribution, so you might actually be able to find them. The one thing it really has over other toys is the seamless body, but even then, modern Black Series articulation is cleaner than it's ever been, so even that may not be incentive enough anymore. In my view, the failure of Hyperreal Luke, and subsequently the line overall, was due to multiple overlapping factors. Scale, pricing, distribution, choice of outfit, and, mainly, an overabundance of pre-established competition. Despite being produced by two very different companies, there was a surprising amount of overlap between these two toy lines in both their pros and cons. And even though my interests lie a lot more with one than the other, I think both had a lot of fun to offer. Sadly, that wasn't enough to save them from their ultimate fate of Shelfwarmer shame.